He sat across from her, live on air, with millions watching. She smiled, poised to break the story that would end him. In her hand was a printed email, one she claimed would ruin Denzel Washington's career forever. But what she didn't expect was for him to take the email and start reading it out loud, word for word. What was supposed to trap him would soon trap her. But buried in that email was a secret no one was ready for. Why did Denzel look straight into the camera and say, "You wanted the truth? Then let's tell it all"? Denzel Washington didn't usually do live interviews. He was private, disciplined, and stayed out of the drama. For decades, he let his work speak for itself. But when a young political figure named Karoline Leavitt requested a live one-on-one for a national town hall broadcast to discuss fame, politics, and race in America, Denzel surprised everyone by saying yes. No PR filter. No script. Just a camera, a stage, and 2 microphones. From the start, something about the setup felt off. The media called it an unexpected meeting of minds. But insiders whispered something else. Karoline, a sharp and ambitious political voice with growing influence, had her own reasons for sitting across from Denzel that night, and it wasn't for unity. Behind the scenes, there were rumors. Anonymous emails had been circulating among journalists. The contents hinted that Denzel had once made private statements that could destroy his reputation. Things taken out of context. Words twisted. One email in particular was said to be especially explosive. Karoline had it. Or at least, that's what she believed. What made the setup even more dangerous was the timing. Denzel had just been named a recipient of a Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the ceremony was only days away. One bad headline, one misstep, could change everything. Karoline's team had planned this carefully. They waited for the moment when his image was most untouchable to introduce doubt. The broadcast was billed as a conversation on culture and identity, but Karoline had no intention of keeping it light. She wanted to be the one who exposed the truth. To her, this wasn't just about ratings, it was about legacy. About power. About proving something. Her team had prepped her to stay calm, composed, and strategic. They told her to smile while delivering the fatal blow. And on the surface, that's exactly what she did. The cameras rolled. The audience sat in silence. Denzel walked onto the set with his signature grace, greeted her with a nod, and took a seat across from her. The first 20 minutes were cordial. They talked about faith, upbringing, and his passion for mentoring youth. But Karoline's eyes kept drifting to the folder beside her. She tapped it with her fingers like it held the crown jewel of her argument. Then, with perfect timing and a smile sharp enough to slice through the stage lights, she said, "Mr. Washington, I want to ask you about something private. Something that was leaked to me just this morning." The room tensed. The director in the control booth mouthed, "Here it comes." Denzel remained still. Calm. He looked her in the eyes and said, "Go ahead." That was the moment everything changed. Karoline slowly pulled the paper from her folder. The audience leaned forward. Even the production crew held their breath. She lifted it into view and said, "I have here an email that you allegedly sent to a former campaign advisor in 2018. It contains some concerning language. Would you like to explain what you meant by?" But before she could finish, Denzel reached across the table and gently took the paper from her hand. He didn't glance at the host. He didn't ask for clarification. He unfolded the email, looked straight at the camera, and said, "Let's read it together, shall we?" And just like that, Karoline's smile faltered. It was supposed to be her knockout punch. But Denzel had just picked it up and flipped the script, live, on national television. Long before this moment under the stage lights, Denzel Washington had been quietly fighting battles no one saw. While his public image was spotless, his real work happened far from the cameras. In the neighborhoods most had forgotten, in the homes where opportunity never knocked, he showed up quietly and often. He donated to schools that were falling apart. He funded after-school programs for kids with nowhere else to go. And he never let the cameras follow. He believed in doing good for the sake of good, not glory. But this quiet kindness made him a problem for some very powerful people. His influence stretched far beyond movies. It reached into politics, policy, and young minds. And not everyone liked that. Karoline Leavitt had grown up watching Denzel on screen. She admired his talent but didn't trust his message. She believed he was too careful, too perfect, and too influential. As she rose in politics, backed by donors who saw Denzel's quiet power as a threat, they whispered in her ear. They told her it was time to pull the mask off. They hinted at things in his past. They handed her fragments, pieces of private letters, old emails, and snippets of phone calls. Most were nothing. But they looked like something when pulled apart and framed with malice. Karoline was sharp, ambitious, and under pressure to rise quickly. Her team gave her a mission: take down a legend. She didn't question where the documents came from. She only saw an opportunity. What she didn't know was that years ago, Denzel had written a deeply personal letter to a mother who had lost her son in a police shooting. He had never spoken about it publicly. The boy had been part of a mentorship group Denzel funded in secret. The mother had reached out, not expecting a reply. But he wrote back anyway. It was a letter filled with heartbreak, frustration, and truth. He wrote like a man trying to understand a broken world. In it, he questioned systems, power, and even his own place in a country that both celebrated and feared men like him. He never meant for it to be shared. But somehow, part of that letter had been pulled into the so-called leaked email Karoline now held. Denzel knew the game. He knew how a single sentence, ripped from its full meaning, could be used like a weapon. And he had seen it happen before. When he got the call from his team that Karoline's people were preparing to confront him live, he didn't panic. He sat with it. He reviewed everything they had. He recognized the language in the email. His words. But twisted. He realized something even darker. This wasn't just a media hit. It was personal. Someone had gone into his private files. Someone had betrayed his trust. But Denzel had been here before. He knew that truth doesn't scream, it stands. So when he agreed to do the live interview, he didn't do it to defend himself. He did it to expose something bigger. He wanted people to see how power uses narrative. How good men are turned into villains when they refuse to play along. His calm demeanor during the opening of the interview came from knowing something Karoline didn't, that her story was full of holes, and that her ambition had led her straight into a trap of her own making. In her preparation, Karoline had memorized the talking points, practiced the delivery, and smiled for the camera. But she never stopped to ask if what she had was the full story. The men around her, the donors who pulled strings and controlled headlines, had assured her she'd be a hero for confronting him. They didn't care about the truth. They cared about the win. They saw Denzel's influence growing in spaces where they had no control, inner cities, classrooms, churches. They saw him as a symbol of resistance wrapped in elegance. And they wanted that symbol crushed. So when Karoline looked into the lens and said, "Let's talk about this email," she wasn't just reading from paper. She was reading a script handed to her by forces much larger than she understood. She thought she was confronting a man. But she was stepping into a story built on years of quiet service, sacrifice, and unshakable resolve. And Denzel was ready to let the world see exactly who had tried to silence him, and why. The silence in the studio stretched for just a beat too long as Denzel held the printed email in his hand. Every pair of eyes, from the control room to the audience watching at home, was locked onto him. Karoline kept her expression smooth, but inside, her heart pounded. She had practiced this moment countless times. Her team had gone over every word, every reaction, every scenario where Denzel might deny the email, push back, or walk off the set. But none of them imagined he'd just take the paper. She watched as he unfolded it carefully, as if it were a delicate piece of history. His fingers didn't tremble. His face didn't flinch. That terrified her more than anything. Karoline sat back slightly, trying to keep the upper hand. The document had been reviewed by lawyers. Her advisors swore it was authentic enough to raise questions, to sow doubt. It didn't need to be real. It just needed to feel real. That's what one of the consultants told her. "Perception is truth," he said, smirking over his laptop screen. "Once you get the email in front of the cameras, we control the story." That same man was now in the green room watching the live feed, eyes wide, fingers frozen over his phone. Something wasn't going according to plan. The email was a Frankenstein creation. A little real, a lot fake. A few lines taken from Denzel's past messages, twisted and placed next to inflammatory phrases he never wrote. To anyone skimming, it looked legitimate. There was a real date, a subject line that hinted at political frustration, and a few bolded phrases that, on their own, could cause a firestorm. The goal wasn't to prove anything. It was to cast a shadow. Just enough of one to make headlines. But they underestimated who they were dealing with. Denzel had seen the traps before. Throughout his life, people tried to provoke him, bait him, push him into anger so they could point and say, "See? He's not who you think he is." But Denzel learned long ago that the calmest man in the room often holds the most power. As he stared at the page, he remembered exactly where the first real line came from. It was from a message to his late friend Marcus, an activist and school principal in Atlanta. The second line was familiar too, pulled from a speech Denzel once gave to students in Harlem, edited, twisted, and placed beside a fake quote about radical influence and control of the media. That part wasn't his. Not even close. And then there was the third paragraph. That was the one that cut the deepest. It came from the private letter he wrote to the grieving mother, the one he had sworn no one would ever see. It was raw, honest. It wasn't meant for the world. But here it was, bleeding into the airwaves. Karoline had no idea. She didn't know where those words came from. She thought they were just part of the email. Just more material for the takedown. But Denzel knew. And more than that, he knew what this moment really was. It wasn't just an interview. It was a test. A moment when a man's past, present, and future collide in front of the world. And how he responds defines everything. Karoline broke the silence. "Mr. Washington, I'll give you a moment to read it. Then I'd like to know if you still believe you deserve the Presidential Medal of Freedom." The audience let out a low gasp. It wasn't the question, it was the venom behind it. Denzel didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked down at the paper, then back up at Karoline. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't even surprised. They were focused. Heavy with understanding. "I've read this," he said quietly. "And I know exactly what it is." Karoline opened her mouth, ready to press him further, but he raised one finger. Just one. And she stopped. "You want the truth?" he asked, turning slightly toward the camera. "You brought this to me hoping I'd be scared. Hoping it stood. Walk off. Deny it. But you've got the wrong man. So let me help you out. I'll read it for you." The studio froze. The control room lit up with voices. "Is he serious?" Cut to commercial. "No, let it roll." Denzel looked at the page again and started to read. His voice was even, slow, steady. He read the real lines as they were, without shame. He paused before the twisted parts and then read them too, but with a slight change in tone, just enough to show the difference. And when he got to the stolen paragraph, the one meant only for that grieving mother, he stopped. A long pause. You could hear a pin drop. His voice dropped a register, and he read it anyway. Word for word. Not for Karoline. Not for the cameras. But for the mother. For the boy. For everyone watching who ever felt unseen, unheard, and misunderstood. When he finished, he placed the paper on the table. No reaction. No defense. Just silence. Karoline shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Her producers stared in shock. They wanted chaos, scandal, a meltdown. What they got instead was dignity wrapped in quiet fire. Denzel turned back to her and said, "Now, what would you like to ask me next?" Denzel's voice echoed across the studio with a calm so powerful it made the lights feel hotter and the room smaller. He read the first line again, this time slower. You could hear each word fall like weight onto the stage. "There comes a time when silence is betrayal." He looked up briefly, letting that sentence hang in the air, then continued reading the so-called email. As he moved through each line, it became clear that this wasn't just a reading. It was a reckoning. His voice didn't shake, but there was emotion in it, controlled, firm, but unmistakably real. Everyone watching, at home, backstage, online, could feel it. Karoline had meant to expose him, but with every word he read, the spotlight turned in her direction. He read one section, paused, and pointed to it. "This right here," he said, "is from a letter I wrote to a mother whose son was shot and killed. That boy was 17. He wanted to be an artist. He died in a traffic stop 2 blocks from his home. I told her the truth in that letter. I told her I was tired of seeing the same story play out. And now, here it is again. Chopped up. Rearranged. Used to make me look like a villain." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His restraint was more powerful than any outburst. Karoline sat frozen, blinking rapidly, hands clasped tightly together on her lap. Her team fed her lines through the earpiece, but she couldn't respond. Not now. Not after what he just said. The producers in the control room didn't know whether to cut to commercial or let it ride. The director made the call: keep it live. Let the world see this unfold. Because this wasn't just TV anymore. This was something else. This was history. Denzel kept reading, exposing the mismatched phrases for what they were. One line about radical control of information was taken from an article someone else wrote. Another phrase about media manipulation had been pulled from a quote he gave years ago, totally out of context. He read it anyway, then looked at the camera. "That part. Not mine," he said. "But I see why you'd want it to be." His words landed like hammer strikes. They weren't loud. But they were sharp. Surgical. And then came the part no one saw coming. After finishing the reading, Denzel folded the paper and slid it across the table. He looked at Karoline and asked, "Do you know where you got this?" She opened her mouth, hesitated, and said, "It was sent to my team anonymously." Denzel nodded slowly. "Right. And you didn't ask who sent it? You didn't think to verify it before bringing it here in front of the world?" Her jaw tightened, and she shifted in her chair. He leaned in just slightly. "See, I know where this came from. I know whose computer it was taken from. Because it wasn't just a leak. It was a theft." The studio buzzed with electricity. Denzel wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was making an accusation. A bold one. Karoline looked stunned. The audience murmured. Denzel went on. "Someone went into my private files. Took a piece of my life and rewrote it. They fed it to you, knowing you wouldn't look too closely. Because you wanted this moment. You wanted a headline. But what you didn't realize was that you weren't the one holding the power tonight. You were being used." He sat back, calm as ever. "You're not the first person to try and control a story with a lie. And I doubt you'll be the last. But here's the thing about lies, they need chaos to survive. Truth doesn't. Truth just needs a moment." And in that moment, the nation leaned forward. Hashtags began trending. Clips of the reading were already being uploaded. Some called it the most powerful moment in live television history. Others just watched in silence, processing the weight of what they'd seen. Denzel didn't try to clear his name. He didn't beg for understanding. He didn't accuse Karoline of malice. Instead, he exposed the game without playing it. He held up a mirror and let the world decide what it saw. Karoline looked down, her carefully prepared notes now useless. Her hands were still. Her voice, gone. She had come to end a man's legacy with one piece of paper. Instead, she had become part of a moment that would live far longer than any news cycle. The live broadcast continued, but something had shifted. Karoline Leavitt was no longer in control of the moment. Her plan, crafted so carefully behind closed doors, was unraveling in real time. Denzel Washington had turned her trap inside out and held it up to the world with grace, not rage. But just when viewers thought the story had peaked, Denzel dropped a quiet line that changed everything. "I know where it came from," he had said. At first, people thought he was just bluffing, just reclaiming the moment. But the way he said it, measured, sure, unshaken, made people lean closer to their screens. He wasn't guessing. He knew. In the studio, producers scrambled. Phones rang off the hook backstage. Executives were on the line with legal teams. Everyone was looking for answers. Who gave Karoline the email? How did she get access to Denzel's private letters? And more importantly, who would risk stealing from a man like Denzel Washington, knowing the world would find out? The answer wasn't simple. And it wasn't public. Yet, Denzel waited. He let the silence linger. Then he continued. There's a name attached to this file. Not a fake one. A real one. Someone I trusted. His eyes didn't move toward the camera this time. They locked onto Karoline. You didn't know, did you? You thought it was just strategy. Just another story to spin. But this isn't a headline. It's betrayal. And I've seen betrayal before. His words were sharp now. Still calm, but sharper. Like a knife being drawn, not swung. Karoline looked shaken. Not because she knew the source, she didn't. That was clear. But because the lie she thought she controlled was now breathing on its own, twisting back toward her. Denzel went on. The file you used. It was taken from a drive that only 3 people had access to. One of them passed away last year. One of them is me. And the third? Well, the third is going to have to answer some questions. He didn't say the name. He didn't have to. The audience didn't need it. The truth had already started to spread, like water through cracks in glass. Within minutes, people online were pulling threads. Reddit boards lit up. Twitter timelines exploded. A former assistant of Denzel's, a man named Craig Heller, was named in a lawsuit from 2 years ago for selling personal stories to a tabloid. The suit had been settled quietly. But now, people connected the dots. Craig had worked with Denzel for 5 years, managing personal correspondence and digital records. He left the job under unclear terms. Now, his name was trending again, and not for the right reasons. Denzel never confirmed it out loud. He didn't need to. He had already planted the seed. People now had the pieces. They just had to put them together. Karoline realized this too late. She had walked into a storm thinking she was the one bringing thunder. But the real storm had been building for years. And Denzel had just opened the skies. But there was another twist, one that went beyond the betrayal. Denzel leaned forward again, voice lower now. What hurts the most, he said, is not that someone stole from me. It's that they used the words I wrote in love, in grief, and twisted them into weapons. Not against me. Against truth. Against decency. He paused. I wrote that letter to a mother who buried her child. That letter was sacred. And someone treated it like a tool to break headlines. The audience was dead silent. Karoline's eyes filled with something different now. Not guilt. Not shame. But fear. She hadn't known. She thought it was just political fuel. Just something to shake up a powerful man. But now she understood. She had stepped on something sacred. And the world knew it. Denzel didn't demand punishment. He didn't call for resignations or lawsuits. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment, opened them again, and said, if you want to know the truth, go back and read the full letter. All of it. Not the version someone chopped up. Not the one edited for outrage. The real one. It's being released now. He looked off camera. Somewhere backstage, someone nodded. A team member. A friend. The letter, in its full form, had already been uploaded to Denzel's website. Verified. Uncut. Complete. Within seconds, news outlets had it. Anchors read it live. And the world finally saw what Karoline had tried to use as a weapon. A man's grief. A man's love. His plea for change. And it moved people. Not against him, but toward him. The moment the full letter hit the internet, everything changed. What had started as a quiet trap on live TV had exploded into something no one could stop. News anchors paused their usual segments to read the letter out loud. Social media lit up with raw reactions. Tears, outrage, apologies, and praise. What people found in that letter wasn't a man trying to protect himself. It was a man bearing his soul in a world that rarely listens. It was truth in its purest form. The words weren't polished. They were honest, and that honesty cut deeper than any scandal could. Karoline Leavitt left the studio quietly. She didn't speak to the press. Her team rushed her into a black SUV and sped away from the cameras. Inside, she sat still, her phone buzzing non-stop. Messages from allies, critics, reporters, and friends filled her screen. Some asked what she knew. Others asked how she didn't know. She stared out the window, seeing the city blur by, but hearing only Denzel's words in her mind. You wanted a headline. You stepped on something sacred. She had been so focused on winning the moment that she never thought about what she was breaking. Denzel, on the other hand, didn't stay for post-interviews. He didn't wave to the crowd or issue a press release. He walked out of the studio alone, stepped into a quiet car, and disappeared into the night. But before he left the building, he recorded one short voicemail and sent it to his manager. Don't book anything this week.
No statements.
No TV. Just let it sit. They've heard enough. That was all he said.
No anger.
No pride. Just peace. The kind of peace that comes when you know you did what you were meant to do. Over the next 24 hours, headlines changed tone. The same networks that had teased Denzel caught in leaked email scandal rewrote their banners to Washington's live reading sparks national reflection. Journalists from across the spectrum admitted what few ever do: they had been wrong. They had jumped the gun. The so-called leak was nothing more than a cruel trick, pieced together by someone desperate to shake a legacy they couldn't touch with truth. Denzel hadn't just defended himself. He had lifted the curtain on how easily truth can be bent, and how quickly people believe it when it fits their goals. But one part of the story stayed buried, known only to a few. Craig Heller, the former assistant, had vanished. His phone went straight to voicemail. His accounts were locked. Some said he was in hiding. Others said he had already fled the country. Legal papers were drawn up in the background, but Denzel never signed them. He didn't want revenge. He wanted something else. Something quieter. He wanted people to understand that not all battles need noise. Some victories are silent. Karoline released a statement 2 days later. It was short and carefully written. I was misled. I take responsibility for not fully vetting the information I shared. I apologize to Mr. Washington and to the public. But the words felt empty. The damage wasn't to Denzel's image. It was to her own. Voters questioned her judgment. Her donors stopped calling. One network dropped her upcoming special. Another cancelled an event she was set to headline. Her rise had turned into a stumble, and the fall echoed louder than she ever expected. Meanwhile, the letter Denzel read became a symbol. Teachers printed it out and read it in class. Churches used it during Sunday sermons. Parents shared it with their children. It wasn't just a letter anymore. It was a message, a reminder that words have power, and that truth will always find its way through the noise. Denzel didn't speak publicly again for weeks. When he finally did, it was during a quiet event at a youth center he helped build. No reporters. No stage. Just folding chairs, a microphone, and a group of teenagers who wanted to know how to stand strong in a world that sometimes tries to silence them. He spoke softly. Sometimes, you'll be tested. Not with fists. But with lies. With whispers behind your back. With people who twist your truth because they're afraid of it. But you don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to stand. If you do that, the rest will come. The room was silent. No one moved. No one blinked. In that moment, those teens didn't see a movie star. They saw a man who stood up when it mattered most, and walked away without needing to shout. What was left unsaid, though, echoed even louder. Denzel never named Craig. Never called out Karoline directly again. He didn't need to. The truth had done its job. And in the end, that's what stayed with people. Not the scandal. Not the leak. But the moment when a man took back his story, not with anger, but with truth.